Well, it's interesting, and this happens to us all the time where now we're getting news articles that arise from like social media posts.
Yeah.
It just kind of blows my mind that somebody will make a post on social media and then suddenly people are reporting it in like major news works. And
Yeah.
this is one of those instances. So this is a segment on ineffective sunscreens. And it comes from a social media post where some doctors were actually taking sunscreens and testing them to see if the SPF, which is the sun protective factor, was actually what it stated on the bottle. And like the one that caught the most attention is there was a doctor, and I don't think he's a medical doctor, he's like a science doctor, like PhD doctor,
Okay.
was testing this sunscreen that's supposed to be SPF 45, and it came back at 6.
That's
So
like
that
pointless.
yeah, that's bad, right? Because when you buy these sunscreens, you're assuming that they're actually going to protect you as well as the bottle states.
Right.
And of course, a lot of people are like, well, how does this happen? How do these companies, say that this does one thing and it doesn't? Because the Food and Drug Administration is really involved with sunscreens. And honestly, I didn't realize how involved they were until I started researching this for this segment. But they regulate that these distributors do their own testing to make sure that the product is accurate. And if it's not, like they can get sanctioned or, I guess have the product pulled off the market by the FDA.
But there's like a way that they can like fudge it because they're in charge of their own testing.
Right, they are in charge of their own testing.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, okay, is it actually accurate? And so, that kind of brings one way that these things could be less effective. The other is if you get sunscreen that is not under the jurisdiction of the Food and Drug Administration, right? Because where do most people buy their stuff these days?
Like if you on like Amazon.
Yeah, they buy it online, right? And so one of the people that was talking about one of the bad sunscreens they got said, "Oh, I was going to buy a Bullfrog or like one of the really well-known brands,
Yeah.
but I saw this other one that was like a third of the price, and so I bought that, and then it didn't work." So a couple ways that people can avoid getting bad. Well, I guess when you buy sunscreen? Do you buy brand name or do you buy?
I
Just
usually
whatever?
buy Banana Boat,
Oh, Banana Boat. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a pretty good one.
like
yeah.
the sport one.
So I'm the same way. For certain things, I don't want like the bargain basement, right? Like we've talked about, like buying the cheapest thing ever is not a great idea for like plastic surgeons, and
Yeah.
it's probably not a great idea for sunscreen either because you are relying on it to be effective.
Yeah.
So buying a brand that's well established. So there's a lot of them out there. Banana Boat's one, Coppertone, Bullfrog. La Roche-Posay is like the really good expensive one. Neutrogena, and then Equate is I think the Walmart version, which allegedly is pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if you're out there and you're worried about getting sunscreen that's not effective, then obviously buying stuff in the United States is always good. I mean, but you can buy stuff online. Just buy reputable brands.
Yeah. Are there like organic sunscreens? I feel like organic would be really hard to make it to like SPF 50.
Yeah, we're going to talk about
know?
that actually. And in fact, we can just jump right into that because I thought, in addition to, warning people about these ineffective sunscreens, we can also talk about some of the specifics of sunscreen because the more you know about it, like the better you are equipped to, protect yourself. And so, you're talking about the different types of sunscreens. So there's two broad categories of sunscreens, and I guess the first one would be the more organic. So these are the mineral sunscreens, okay? So the mineral sunscreens have active ingredients of either titanium or zinc oxide, all right?
Okay.
And I guess that's organic. I mean, I guess, what do you mean? I mean, not chemical.
It's a mineral.
It's a mineral, right? Yeah.
It's naturally
It's not a
found.
chemical. Yeah, it's not a chemical, right? So I guess that would be considered more organic. So these are actually the best. These are the best sunscreens.
Good.
They actually form a barrier, a physical barrier that basically blocks the UV light from getting to your skin. Some people are averse to using them though because these are the ones that go on. They're kind of like white and chalky.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
I was thinking about like how did like people back in the day prevent sunburns when they were outside a lot?
Probably rubbed mud on their face.
Yeah,
I don't
literally
know.
mud.
Mud face, yeah.
Yeah.
So these are actually the best, but some people don't like to use them because it does make a white, chalky kind of appearance on the skin.
Right.
Which I get that. I mean, I've used those before. I'm like, oh, this is kind of thick, but it's very, very
I'm
effective.
a spray-on girl.
We're going to talk about that. So these mineral ones are also best for sensitive skin because they're more natural.
Yeah.
And one thing to remember with the mineral sunscreens is if you're using other products, so say like moisturizer or lotion or whatever, you want to put this one on last.
Yeah.
Because it makes a barrier to the skin.
Right.
So you don't want to put this mineral sunscreen on and then try to put lotion on over the top of it.
That's the same thing with when you're doing your skincare routine. You always put sunscreen on at the end of everything.
Well, that depends on the type, because we're going to go to the second one, which is the chemical sunscreens. So these are the ones that most people prefer. This is like the lotions and the sprays.
Okay.
And so these have chemical active ingredients like oxybenzene, octinoxate, sinoxate, dioxybenzene. There's some other ones. And so these chemicals actually absorb UV light. So instead of blocking it physically, these chemicals absorb the light.
Doesn't sound right.
Well, I mean, these are the ones that you're probably using the
Yeah.
most, and honestly, myself as well, because you kind of hit the nail on the head a minute ago talking about sprays.
Yeah.
What do people like? People like convenience.
Yeah.
And it is super convenient to take spray sunscreen, I'm having like a stroke. Spray sunscreen and spray it on versus like lathering yourself up with like a lotion.
Yeah.
But the problem with the spray sunscreens, they do work, but the studies showed that people are very prone to miss areas with the spray.
Yeah.
Versus the lotions where you're putting it on.
Yeah. Whenever I spray myself, I always like rub it in.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. That's a good way to like prevent it. Yeah, I do the same thing.
I've done it before. Like I've seen people that just like spray it on them and they don't rub it in. Then they have these weird
like
streaks
sunburns
all over them.
Oh my god, that reminds me when my wife and I were younger. We took a trip and we went to Mexico, and I still hold this over heads. This is like almost 20 years ago. So I was like, "Oh, can you put sunscreen on my back?" So she did, but she like missed I was kind of more muscular at the time, and I had like kind of like ridge, in your back where like the muscles kind of go down. And you have this like valley or whatever. She like totally missed that part somehow, and like I was out in the sun like all day, and I got the worst sunburn, and it looked like a skunk stripe because it went like straight up and down my back. Yeah, that was pretty funny. But yeah, so the sprays, you definitely want to be careful that you don't miss anything. And if you're using the chemical sunscreens, these actually go on first because they have to absorb into the skin.
Okay.
And if you put like a lotion on first and then use the chemical sunscreens, it can prevent it from getting into the skin.
That makes sense.
And it may not be as effective. So the other thing about sunscreens, you guys ever heard broad spectrum? Do you know what that means?
I've heard of it, but I don't really know what it means.
Yeah, perfect. Travis, broad spectrum?
No, I've not heard
All right, so this is a good one. When you're buying sunscreen, you do want to buy what's called broad spectrum. And the FDA kind of like forces people to use that term specifically. So there's two types of ultraviolet light the sun makes, UVB and UVA. So UVB is the one that gives you sunburn. Right. So technically when people are using sunscreen, they're mostly wanting to block UVB light because that's the one that causes sunburn. It also is the biggest contributor to cancer. But UVA light does affect your skin even though it doesn't burn you. It ages your skin and it damages it on kind of a microscopic level. And if the sunscreens don't say broad spectrum, then they don't block UVA light.
Yeah.
So when you buy sunscreen, you want broad spectrum to block both the UVB, which is the big one, but also the UVA, which also causes problems with your skin. Application. How often do you apply your sunscreen?
Isn't it like every couple of hours?
Yeah, right, exactly right. So that's what most experts recommend is to apply every 2 hours. And then that kind of like goes back to the SPF level because I actually learned something. I probably should have known this because I've talked about sunscreen in the past. But when you talk about SPF like 5, 10, 15, 30, whatever, I always kind of had this like thought in my mind that the SPF value was a level of how much sun it blocks.
Yeah, protection. Yeah.
Is that what you thought? Mm-hmm. So that's not right.
Oh.
So SPF is actually a measure of time.
Oh.
So like a 30 blocks as much as a 6, but it blocks for a much longer time.
Oh, okay.
And so when you're putting on these longer ones, like allegedly it lasts longer.
Great.
Versus like a 6 or a 10, which doesn't last as long. And so
that's why I use SPF 50. Whenever I was in Mexico, I would just put it on at the beginning of the day.
Yeah. So
I'd be fine. But I'm also really olive.
So there is, I guess, a little bit of extra protection because people have actually looked at, okay, how much protection do you get from 30 versus 50? And the studies show that if you put on 30 and then you put on 50, like say on a different arm, you're only getting about 1% more protection. with the 50. Like
Okay.
1%, like it's like almost negligible. Like, so 30 is kind of like what the experts recommend. And that does go back to the fact that it's, SPF is a measure of time, not intensity, although you get like a little bit of extra. Now, the final thing is sport sunscreens.
Yeah.
Because the FDA says that these makers can't say they're waterproof because the sunscreens are not waterproof. That the water does affect them. However, the sport sunscreens are water resistant.
Okay.
So if you're doing water stuff like swimming, water skiing, whatever,
Sweating.
I mean, I don't know if that counts. I think sweating doesn't quite count as like the water activities. But if you're doing water activities, you want to apply much more frequently, either 40 or 80 minutes based on the recommendations of
Okay.
the.
Well, I don't follow the rules.
I know you're a rule breaker.
I did not follow the rules.
Did you get sunburned?
No.
No.
I got sunburned beforehand on accident.
Yeah. And then I guess the last thing, just kind of like rounding out this topic, we're talking about sunscreens. Really, the best thing to do is just avoid the sun altogether.
Yeah.
Because you still get some sun exposure. So how do you do that? Well, I mean, you can stay out of the sun. You can wear like long sleeves, wear hats. That's really important. And then avoid peak sun times, which is from like 11 a.m. to 3 p.m.
Yeah.
So I thought there was some good information here. I love when I do a segment and I actually learn something. It's like, oh, dang, I've talked about sunscreen before, but I actually learned some new stuff.
Yeah.
From this.
Me too.
And like the more you know about it, like the more likely you are to get the best outcome when you're using these products. So
Agreed.
interesting. So I'm just going to do like a quick recap of the topic that we were just talking about, which is ineffective sunscreen. So some doctors tested some sunscreens and found that the SPF was not nearly as strong as what was listed on the bottle. In fact, one of them was an SPF of 6 when it stated it was 45. So if you want to avoid getting ineffective sunscreens, your best bet is to get recognized brands like Coppertone, Banana Boat, Bullfrog, Equate, Neutrogena, Roche-Posay. Also avoid bargain basement sunscreens. They're more likely to be ineffective. When you're buying sunscreens, definitely get a broad spectrum one. That means that it blocks not only UVB light, which causes sunburn and skin cancer, but also UVA light, which damages the skin and causes aging. You also, if you're going to get sunscreens, mineral sunscreens are the best. Those are the ones that have either zinc oxide or titanium oxide. Chemical sunscreens are okay, but they're not quite as effective. Just be careful if you're using spray chemical sunscreens because it's much easier to miss spots. You do want to wear an SPF of at least 30, although going up to 50 or 70 has been shown to not have that much added benefit. Reapply your sunscreen every 2 hours, unless you're doing water activities, which then you should be using a sport sunscreen, which is water resistant, and applied every 40 to 80 minutes. And then finally, the best way to avoid sun damage is to just stay out of the sun. And why is staying out of the sun important? Well, the sun causes skin cancer. Skin cancer is the most common cancer in the United States, and it also ages our skin. So if you want to stay young, using sunscreen or staying out of the sun is your best bet. So, nice. That was a good recap.